It's been a day since the most disappointing loss Utah's had in a long time. So, how should we feel about this Utah team? Concerned? Very concerned? Fine? I'm not feeling fine, but that's what we're going to be talking about on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. If this is your first time tuning into our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media. And you can find us on social media at X at Locked On Utes. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by Valley Sports Talk with Brice Larson, host Brice Larson himself on ESPN 960 AM. Brice, appreciate you hopping on to talk about Utah. And wow, this is just such a different tone still. I'm still not completely over, I think, all the emotions of the loss because it is such a frustrating one, right? And we'll dive into why. So what I want to do here is do the traditional concern meter, but I want to relate it to something that was very popular this offseason, which is and still popular, college football 25. So that they have the stadium pulse. Some of you might have seen this meme on social media. When the stadium pulse meter is full, so it goes from green, yellow, orange to red. Red is like Rice-Eccles Stadium versus USC a couple years ago. Like, you're in a lot of trouble, right? And I will say even yesterday, right, there were times where probably got up to red. Arizona feet still made the play. So we're doing how concerned we are. Green is fine. Yellow is slightly concerned. Orange is very concerned. Red, you're in trouble. I am going to go right now. I'm going to go with yellow. I'm just going to go with concerned. I thought about going very concerned. And the reason I would have gone very concerned, and still I could honestly, Cam Rising, just the health and the situation there. I still feel like I am not going to say Cam Rising is going to start for Utah until I actively see him start again. This injury just feels different to me, though, so I just don't feel like we're going to go a full season without seeing Cam Rising again. I could be wrong, but I do feel like we'll see Cam again. And I do want to talk about Cam in a moment. We'll also talk about why Utah struggled so much in the red zone and just a Big 12 outlook at the end because there was a lot that happened in the conference. But to me, I'm going to go in the yellow right now, and I'm going to say with concerned because I'm still concerned because Cam Rising isn't back. But when you're looking at for other reasons, I didn't like what I saw from Utah in the red zone, right? I think against a good secondary, Utah's passing game is going to struggle because at times you have guys that won't always get open. And when they do get open, you have a quarterback in Isaac Wilson who can't always hit them. You also have, I thought the offensive line, the run game did better yesterday, but there were still some key spots where they got slowed down. Some of the things from Utah defensively, I think that unit will be good overall. I still think it was more good Arizona than anything else, but some of the missed tackles, absolutely concerning. So that's where I'm at. I'm firmly in the yellow territory for the stadium pulse right now. Brice, where would you fall?
You know what? I have to go with the exact same that you just mentioned. I'd have to say yellow specifically because I think there is hope on the horizon for Utah with Cam Rising and his situation. You're right. I think it's too early to say that he is
I don't
going
know
to
if you
be.
meant it. That was really good. That was a fantastic pun, by the way. Just want to give you flowers.
Well, hey, look. In the future, you are going to see Cam Rising come back out on the field, play football for Utah. We don't know when it's going to be. It would be a mistake to continue to try and guess and project out when he's going to come back and be on the football field for Utah. But I just can't be too concerned right now. I think it is a little concerning, especially on the defensive side of the football, what happened on Saturday night between Arizona and Utah. But as far as getting too worked up over it, I know a lot of people love to get on the overreaction Monday hype train and say, hey, everything's fallen, the sky's fallen. But the truth is that Kyle Whittingham always has his guys ready to go, and they are going to. It's perfect timing for the bye week. You head into a bye week, you're going to be able to get right and get everything back going. So I'm going to say that I'm in that yellow spot. I think that there is a little bit of hope on the horizon and that Utah is going to be just fine. But there were a couple things that Utah needs to figure out and fix up heading forward.
You're absolutely right. And I think the most important thing you said is not to overreact because it's just one game and we do have a sample size for this Utah football team right now. I do think that Arizona team Based on what I've seen the last few weeks, I think Arizona will end up being the best team that Utah's faced through the first few weeks of this season. I think the bye week was a genuine turning point for that Arizona team. You don't go into Rice-Eccles Stadium and win. We haven't seen an unranked team do that in a very, very long time. And that's why I do think eventually we'll see that team climb back up in the rankings, because you have Tetero McMillan, you have Noah Fafita, you have an offensive line that I actually thought competed pretty well yesterday, even though Fafita had to make plays under pressure, and you have a nice secondary. I think a lot of the sacks were more coverage related than their pass rushes itself, but I give them a lot of credit for stepping up in some key spots too, slowing down Utah's rushing attack at times on some of those key third and fourth downs, and then making plays in the pass game where, whether it was a miss by Wilson, an interception, that was a brutal interception by Wilson, but still got to be able to make the play in that spot. So I do think it's important to remember, hey, this is still the team that beat Oklahoma State last week, right? This felt like it was Utah's year to, once they started to roll, like if Utah was going to go undefeated, this, like as a program, just in general, it felt like it would have probably been this year. So I think that's where a lot of the disappointment comes from, and especially you lose at home. But Brice, I still go back to this. I still think this was the toughest 2-game stretch on Utah's schedule. They emerged 1-1, and they didn't have Cam Rising. So through the first few weeks of the season, if you're telling me Utah's 4-1 and we barely seen Cam Rising, in a lot of ways, that's a win too.
Absolutely. A lot of people will say, look, hey, you got to win every single football game. But when it actually comes down to it, the expectation for this Utah team is still to get back, to get into a Big 12 championship game. And it's still a very real possibility that they could do that, especially with the upcoming schedule that Utah has the rest of the way. I mean, you take a look at the schedule, and Utah could very well make a run in that schedule. I think, in my opinion, the next toughest real test that they're going to have, and now we're not even sure with their loss on Saturday, would be UCF. We saw how they played on the road, or excuse me, at home against the Colorado team that we're still not really sure about. But look, I think a Black Friday meeting with UCF could be the toughest game left on the schedule. So with that being said, it's going to be a little bit easier of a ride. Not a lot of tough talent the rest of the way, but we'll see how things turn out.
You're not going to go with BYU maybe being the toughest too? BYU, Iowa State?
It could be. Look, Iowa State's a really good football team, and we'll see. I don't know that they've truly been tested just yet. BYU, here's the problem with BYU. If Utah and BYU would have played within the first couple of weeks of conference play, then yes, it would be a tough game. Look at what BYU and what they've done, plus what's happened to them in the last couple of weeks. At the end of that game against Baylor, they were playing with second and third string guys, true freshmen on the outside who really can't match up with big time power forward talent just yet. They need some more time out on the field. The longer the season goes, the more BYU's going to have to reach into that depth, and it's just not there for BYU yet. So that way, I think that as the season goes on, BYU's going to start losing some games, and some of this magic is going to start to wear off on that program. But when you get Utah and BYU together, anything could happen.
Anything can happen, absolutely. And one thing I also noticed, just looking at the schedule. Okay, and real quick, I didn't know if I wanted to do this or not, but it's just been loud on Twitter, so I guess I'll give in. The Cam Rising thing, I'm not mad at Cam Rising. A lot of people I see are mad at Cam Rising. I believe Cam Rising wants to be out there. I believe Cam Rising wants to play. I am never going to come on this show and talk about a player's heart and him like giving up on his team or anything. I just think some of the narratives that stuff getting thrown around there, I don't like that at all. I just would think about the things that Cam Rising's done for this team and this program, to then all of a sudden question his toughness, and that's where that's just icky to me, and I don't like that. I believe he wants to be out there, and I believe the team is making the best decision for them to try and win, because it is obviously an injury that's keeping Cam off the field. So that's where, really quick on that. But also say, for everyone who's like, Utah missed their ramp up period with Cam Rising. Well, I think Arizona State's better than we thought. I still expect Utah to win that game. TCU offense is better. I think the defense is going to give them a lot of, like, Utah's going to give their defense problem, and Houston's the worst team in the conference. So still kind of a ramp up game until you get to BYU, who could be ranked, Colorado, who's looking pesky right now. Iowa State could also still be ranked. They're 16th in the country at the moment. And then you get down to a UCF team that could be another one. Like you said, that weird Friday night game in Fox. That's another one that I look at, and I'm very much so intrigued by at the moment. So it's going to be fun to see how all of this in Big 12 play does end up shaking out. And look, if Utah wants to achieve their goals, though, they got to fix some things, especially where I think it went wrong yesterday was in the red zone for Utah early. I want to specifically look back over the film and talk about what happened to Utah in the red zone. We're going to be discussing that in one moment. But first, I want to take an opportunity to talk to you all about our friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game that you need to check, that you want to make a bet, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. The NFL season rolls on. We got some fun Monday night games. How about Tyler Huntley getting a start for the Miami Dolphins? He's got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle at his disposal. How's he going to fare against the Tennessee Titans? You can head over to FanDuel today and look at that. Also, we got the NFL slate coming back next week. No Utah game, but a great weekend of college football still on deck, and the Major League playoffs are beginning. You can head over to FanDuel today and get in on the action. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com today. All right, Brice, coming up and back and talking about why Utah lost the game. I said on yesterday's show, I still believe the biggest reason is the red zone. So we should talk about why Utah struggled to execute in the red zone. And I think you see this is a bigger conversation about football to me, about why teams struggle in the red zone sometimes. And the truth is, it's just harder to punch it in because this is where it becomes a little bit of a math game. There's not as much surface area that a defense has to defend. So it gets harder to run because what? The safety's closer to the line of scrimmage, right? And you also just get the simple fact of, because there's not as much space to work with, the deep threat, the receivers, you can't have as much space for them to operate on the outside with. So that tests your route running ability and everything. It's harder as an offense to score in the red zone. And you see why Utah, with a backup quarterback, and as we'll dive into a little bit more in a second, lack of creative play calling, struggled to score in the red zone, especially early against Arizona. And I mean, hey, they just struggled to move the ball in the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, one other thing you mentioned lack of creative play calling. One thing that when you get into the red zone, you have to take into account is that your playbook shrinks. There's not a lot of plays that you still have at your disposal to be able to call when you get inside the red zone specifically. So that's one thing that, and then the point of the attack as well. I thought that Arizona was really just pushing Utah around at the line of scrimmage, which is something we don't see very often, but it definitely happened in that game on Saturday night. That's something that Utah's got to go back and look at the film and figure out the reason why they were getting pushed around. And there's got to be some things that they clean up here and there. Maybe it's just the fact that they need to be more physical and that they need to come back out and figure out how they're going to win at the point of attack. And I think that's part of the reason where Utah went wrong on Saturday.
I agree. And it's such an interesting thing too, right? Because Mackay ran for 5.7 yards a carry, but there were several big situations, particularly in the red zone. The box is more loaded because the safeties are going to play closer, where Utah couldn't get the push. So let's look back on especially those early red zone drives. The very first one for Utah, right? They get into the red zone, and this is where you also have to be better and you have to execute. The very first, okay, and this is where also, like, I still don't love the QB runs not working was so frustrating because Utah continued to do them. Yes, Avery Johnson had success running against Arizona a few weeks back. Avery Johnson and Isaac Wilson are not the same running quarterback, and my frustration is not that it was in the playbook. My frustration is it continued to not work, and Utah continued to go back to it. Wilson is not as confident running. He's not as good of a runner as Avery Johnson, and the confidence between the two when they run, nowhere near the same. So you get inside the red zone. The other thing I do,
sorry to cut you off. The other thing I do want to bring up in that respect is that Isaac Wilson was getting beat up all night long. He was slow to get up in multiple different situations. And that's kind of scary. If you're a Utah fan and you're seeing this kid just get beat up over and over again, and you continue to run the ball, that's a little bit worrisome, especially, you don't want to see him go down or get injured. So
I know I speak for all Utah fans when I say every time a player takes like that extra second to get up, our instant, like, just PTSD from last season, like Seth said, like, is he hurt? Is everyone going to get hurt? Is it season-ending injuries? Are we just going to be another season defined by injuries? That's exactly what happens anytime. And Wilson, that's where I still I'm trying to remember how many, and you guys let me know in the comments, how many times do you think Wilson's thrown the ball away on the season? He has to do that more frequently, because I didn't think a lot of the time that I was like, oh man, Arizona won in 3 seconds, and a lot of their defensive line. And a lot of time Arizona won in coverage, so then there's nowhere to go with the ball. I'd rather Wilson throw it away. Maybe Utah has coached him up to want him to hold on to it and try to make a play for as long as he can, but I just wish he would throw it away more, and that's how I read it. But going back to those red zone drives, first one, Wilson runs, miss the hole. So does Mekhi. So very first couple runs you get for Utah, they miss the hole. Those are the kind of things in the red zone you can't afford to do, because there's not as many holes and lanes to be available to you when the boxes are loaded. And then you get the fourth down, and Mike Mitchell's in there, and he tries to run straight ahead. That the box was way too crowded. There were too many guys down there, and that's where you give Arizona credit, because they got more push as well. But that's where I think you should have done something a little bit more creatively, whether it's emotion or whatever. I felt like in that play, Utah lined up and said, we're bigger and stronger than you because we're Utah. And the truth is that was a long 2 yards you have to get. And I think you also have to use a certain element of creativity. So that's why Utah stalled on the first drive in the red zone. Then you get the second one. Wilson, no one open to throw on his first one. Then he tries to scramble, and then you end up with the last, and it doesn't, and he gets some gain out of it, but I also thought he made the wrong cut on the scramble as well. And I did not like, so going back and watching the jump ball to Caleb Lohner, I do think that's an RPO. I think he has the option to give it and run it. And I think he predetermined that he was going to throw it to Lohner. I don't love that play call. I would much rather everything be on the field. I like what Caleb Lohner's done for Utah. I think banking your fourth down on Caleb Lohner one-on-one, when we've seen him drop and not make plays in the red zone, he has as well, but he's also not made plays. And that's just a lot on a guy who hasn't been playing football for a long time. I thought that was a mistake on Utah's part. If he had given it to Mekhi, might have gotten in, would have been very close. That's where I wish they just ran another play, but that's also where we could look back and say, well, Utah did run a pass play a few plays before. No one got open. So that's also a fair defense there. And then we do get back to right where Utah ended up eventually having to kick the field goal. And that's where you just credit Arizona. The box was full and Utah wasn't able to get the push that they needed to. You had the Wilson short run, the Mekhi short run, again, the quarterback runs, and good coverage by Arizona. Brock Osweiler was talking about it all night. There was nowhere for Utah to throw. And because I think Utah got the wind knocked out of their sails early by being in the red zone 3 different times and not scoring, I felt like guys got frustrated. I think Wilson started to press and try to make plays, a la his interception later on in the game. I think you also look back at the times he would hold on to the ball and the fact that guys were still well covered all game long. I mean, now I can't remember the amount of passes deflected by Arizona, but it was immense. Arizona executed better. I thought they won the coaching battle in yesterday's matchup as well. And I thought Utah did a good job still, more so defensively. But then defensively is where players have to make plays. Offensively, I thought it was a combination of everything. And you have to be better in the red zone if you want to achieve your goals and go on to play in a Big 12 championship if you're Utah.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of work in red zone this upcoming next 2 weeks. And when they get down there, they're going to make a point. This is something else that I think will eventually, if Cam Rising gets back out on the field, will kind of sort itself out. There's 2 reasons why I say that your playbook kind of gets shortened up. Not only it's because you don't have Cam Rising out there on the field, you also you get down there, there's just not as many plays as you can call. One thing that you got to take into account here is that with a young quarterback out on the field, the chess match at the line of scrimmage doesn't happen as much as it would with Cam Rising. I'm sure they trust Cam Rising to go out there and check into a different play when he looks at a defense and can diagnose a defense and figure out what's going on the defensive side of the football. Yep. With Isaac Wilson out there, he might not have that confidence to be able to check in. They might not even want him to do that because of what could happen down there in the red zone. So that's something else you have to take into account here, is that when you get a veteran guy out there and he knows exactly what he's looking at and what he can see on the defensive side, he can check in and check out of plays and play that chess match back and forth. Defense goes one way. We see the offense switch up the play and all sorts of things that can help out a team in the red zone. You just have to have a veteran leader that's been there and done that.
Yeah, and that's an important part to the veteran, because I agree with you. I don't think those checks are always available to Wilson, but I'll also say, and Brice, I'm sure you feel the same way, he can't make the same checks that Cam makes either, just the experience of seeing a defense and what they're in, and that's where it's just very hard when it's a true freshman. So that's where there's going to be things still with Wilson when he plays a good secondary and a secondary that's going to play to the level that Arizona did yesterday. This Utah team will have problems. They don't have a lot of those secondaries coming up. I don't think Arizona has that. I don't think TCU has that. I don't think Houston has that. I think a lot of this could end up being the best secondary performance we see out of a team against Utah and Utah's quarterback situation. When Cam gets back there soon, we anticipate improving, but that's something still we can't bank on, is knowing when exactly Cam will come back. Still believe he'll come back based on what has been reported, but until he's under center, we can't say it's a for sure thing. So while we wait for Cam Rising, and we have to wait to see what's next for Utah. They got a bye week and a lot of things that they can fix and take the time to correct offensively, and even some things defensively, execution-wise, that were not sharp yesterday. Linebackers out of position, defensive linemen not stepping up where they needed to, rushing upfield, sometimes falling for pass set, and then you think it's a pass rush play, so you run too far upfield, take yourself out of it. Things like that Utah will correct and they'll get better at too. But I want to talk about what else happened in the Big 12 and how it relates to Utah now as a Big 12 contender. That's what we'll be talking about in one moment. But first, I want to take an opportunity to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes. It's our friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even faster and easier. Game Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There are so many fantastic features with Game Time, like a panoramic view from your seat, so you know exactly what kind of a deal you're getting. How many times have you gone to buy a ticket and you go, I don't know exactly what the seat will look like. I don't know if that's a fair price. Game Time allows you to see that. They also have that low price guarantee where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. The Game Time ticket coverage is also the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can get so many fantastic features with Game Time today by taking the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, capital LONC, all one word, just those three starting letters capitalized, no spaces between them, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. You can download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Brice, closing this one out, talking about what all happened in the Big 12 yesterday. Colorado got a huge win at UCF. That was one I said going into the season, and still could very end up happening still, even though Utah got their loss. I projected Utah to finish 11-1. My one loss was to Colorado because I know Shedeur Sanders can make NFL throws. And we saw yesterday Utah lost to another guy who could make NFL throws at Noah Fafita. So that's still one that's interesting to me. I was never a huge believer in UCF. I just still felt like it was such a big jump for them to have to make. And there's someone like a BYU who's still adjusting and acclimating to this conference. I did think, and I've eaten crow a couple times on my show now. I thought BYU was going to lose yesterday. Credit BYU for going in there, beating Baylor. I agree with a lot of things that you said, though. I'm still curious to see when the competition gets even stiffer and tougher, how is that going to factor in? BYU very well could be, and I think they're actually ranked higher than Utah right now. So credit BYU for getting it done, but we'll see how it works out when they play some of those other tough teams. And Kansas State, they got a big win over Oklahoma State. Utah, when they beat Oklahoma State, was definitely more good Utah, but Oklahoma State is also showing you that they're more of a middle tier team in this conference than a contender. Their defensive issues, Alan Bowman, their offensive line, really going to come back to bite them. I still believe at the end of the day, this Utah team is still a contender in the Big 12. I think Utah has a great chance still to get down to play in Arlington at the end of the season. But look, this conference, yesterday proved anything, with Utah looking very vulnerable like most of the other teams. This conference is very much open, and we didn't even mention Iowa State yet and some of the things they've been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said multiple times on my show every single day, the Big 12 is the conference of chaos, and you are going to see chaos the rest of the way. With Oklahoma State, like, my question is, where's Ollie Gordon? We were told, and we know Ollie Gordon last year was the best running back in college football. This year, I was on Oklahoma State radio a couple of weeks ago when they were preparing to get ready for that game, and one of the things that the host of that show brought up was that he thinks that Ollie Gordon is just kind of out of it. He's not picking the right lanes. He's not going the right way. He's just not there in the moment. And so that's one thing about Oklahoma State. Like, we thought they were going to have one of the best running backs in the nation coming into this year, and it just hasn't panned out to be that way. I don't know if it's an offensive line issue. I don't know if he's just not watching film. There's something wrong with Ollie Gordon, and until he breaks out, that team is not going to be what we thought they were going to be preseason.
Yeah, it definitely appears that way. And there's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that Oklahoma State, someone we mentioned too. I didn't think they would win the conference, but I thought they would be a top 5 team. I have major doubts about
Yeah.
that. Kansas, another one, thought they would be a top 5 team. That wheels have gone off the wagon fast for Kansas. And I mean, we already
Jeff
mentioned,
Grimes, man.
yeah, Jeff
Something
Grimes.
is up. Losing Kotelnicki to Penn State and having to replace an offense and the scheme and learn new everything for Jalen Daniels and in that situation, it's not a good situation for Kansas right now. They're in shambles at the moment, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better here in the near future.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But hey, once again, I'll end the show with this. If you look at the Big 12 standings right now, there's only one 5-0 team. Iowa State had a bye. So BYU is the only undefeated team in the conference. So I'll give the Cougars their credit. I didn't see it coming. I think most people who are still listening to this pod at this point probably didn't either, unless you are some of those Cougar trolls, and you guys are probably fired up to hear me give it BYU some credit. But this conference is insane. It's going to be a blast to see how it plays out. Utah is still a contender, I believe. We'll see what happens over the next 2 weeks with Cam Rising's health. But in the meantime, Brice, if people want more BYU or just Big 12 Utah sports talk in general, where should they head over to?
Absolutely. Every weekday morning, ESPN 960. You can find us on the 960 AM dial in Utah County. You can find us on 105.1 HD2 all the way through Salt Lake and Davis County as well, or on the Valley Sports Talk with Brice Larson podcast. We're on every single weekday from 8 to 10 a.m. So we've got a lot of stuff that we talk about, not just Utah and BYU football, but we talk about the hockey team that's getting ready to fire up their season. Of course, a lot of jazz talk and a lot of sports talk in general. So come join us every single day.
Yeah, I almost was like, oh yeah, I almost forgot the name of the hockey team, and then I remembered it's the hockey club. It's very simple. Won't have to worry about that. We'll see what the eventual name actually is, but still just wild that that's going to be the name. It's like the Washington Commanders. Although I do like the way that Utah Hockey Club sounds a little bit better while they wait to get the actual name. But either way, Brice, thank you for hopping on with me. That was a lot of fun.
I appreciate always love hopping on with you.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Tomorrow, we get Kyle Whittingham we're going to hear from. What is he going to say to the media now that he's had time to digest the film? He was obviously frustrated off the performance. We'll hear from some of Utah's players as well. So that will be coming up on tomorrow's show. And we'll continue to react to this loss, talk about what it means for this Utah team. We'll be breaking it all down on Locked On Utes.